This is a Rogue Media Network podcast. The Waco History Podcast is sponsored by Brotherwell Brewery on Historic Bridge Street in Waco.
Cross the Brazos at Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn. Cross the Brazos at Waco, I'm safe when I reach San Antonio.
Welcome back to the Waco History Podcast. This is an episode that is another one of those infamous centennials that we're having in Waco. 2023 marks the 100th anniversary since the execution of Roy Mitchell in Waco, Texas, which is debated. I think most say it's a penultimate public execution in Texas. And I've got an expert here. No one's spent more time thinking about this story and researching the story more than John Kamanec, who is a longtime member of the McLennan County Historical Commission. He's a retired surveyor in town. He's written, he's pulling out a very impressive 400-page plus manuscript he's written on the Mitchell cases related to Roy Mitchell. And so he is the expert to bring in to talk about this particular case and the story of Roy Mitchell. And so, John, thanks for being with us. I'm going to ask you to pull that mic a little bit closer, if you would, and just so the folks can hear you well. It would be useful, folks will listen to this podcast that I just said a name they have no reference point for, and that's part of why you did this research, I think, is because folks don't understand this
I
case.
do the same thing. I tell people a story, and they go, who?
Mm-hmm.
And then I mention some of the stuff he did. They go, wow.
Yeah. Well, if you would give us that response you give when folks say who.
Well, I tell them that he was convicted of 6 capital murders in 6 different trials. For some reason, the district attorney wanted to really pin it to him. Nobody else has ever been given 6 death penalties before like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge that finally did the sentencing, he said, I wish I could hang you for all 6 of them, so that each and every one would have a little to do with your going away.
Yeah. So this was a sentencing that was done in early 2023.
Well, he had 5 trials in March and then another trial in April.
Okay. And so go ahead and tell us the story as first off, you spent a lot of time researching this. I'll ask you the question, why? Why did you spend so much time researching this case?
Well, at the time I was laid off, and I would walk down to the central library each day and do a little research or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran into this woman that lived at 1923 Washington. Her name was Carolyn Edwards. And we got started talking. Her house had burned, and I started helping her out there around that, and got started talking. And she asked me about the Jesse Washington stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I explained what the story was behind that. And then she started talking about other lynchings or executions. And I told her about Roy Mitchell. She said, wait a second, this guy was black and he was a serial killer? Mm-hmm. I go, yeah, I guess you could say that. He 11-month time claimed to kill 8 people. I guess that counts. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, has anybody ever written anything about him? I said, well, there's newspaper articles. There's a couple magazines here and there, a little article here and there. But I said they always get it all screwed up. They always say he killed everybody in Cameron Park. And that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. And it was all Lover's Lane stuff, and that wasn't really the case. Some of it was revenge killing. Some was just robberies. And so she said, you ought to write a book on it. I said, okay. Mm-hmm. So I started doing the research, and every time I'd pull something up, I'd go tell her about it. And and more and more, I'd say, well, this is really pretty interesting. And then got more and more information, and I said, okay, so I put it together.
So we've done a podcast episode, and folks are more aware, of course, the Jesse Washington lynching that happens in 1916. And then I think we've referenced on the podcast the Jesse Thomas lynching that happens.
Well, that was actually a shooting, but
but
then
the death,
incineration.
Not a hanging, but he was killed and mutilated in a similar fashion to Washington, and that case is connected to this case, right? So if you would kind of, as you researched, if you could chronologically kind of take us through what you discovered about it. I know it's a lot, and you need a 427-page book to do all of us. But if you
20-something chapters in there.
Yeah, so if you can give us kind of an overview, if you would.
Well, let's see. Roy, what I did, I tracked his life down to where he was born. He came from Hallettsville. His father died when he was 9 years old. He was murdered in Victoria, Texas. And Roy's mother had him and a daughter. And then after her husband died, she had a child by a guy named Johnny Washington. And that was Roy's half-brother. Then she married a 60-something-year-old man who was living with his 90-year-old mother.
Oh, my goodness.
And had grandkids as old as Roy was. She married him, but that didn't last very long. And then next thing you know, she's living in Belton, Texas. And that's where Roy was pretty well raised till about 1912. And then he moved to Waco. In 1913, he married Minnie Wilson, who had about an 8-year-old child. Don't know who the father was. Then he went ahead and the first time he shows up in any police reports is as a victim. He was he had a horse he brought down from El Mott to pick up some meat at the square. Some kids joyrided him. took the horse and went. And at the time, there was no law against stealing a vehicle for joyriding, but horses was another matter. But anyway, he got the horse back, I guess. They never really said. Then he, in 1915, him and Dinky White were at a store in what's called Tekla. Tekla is between basically L3 and Leroy along the railroad there. It was a store owned by George Enoch. Well, George Enoch, he didn't like George. He was arguing with him, and they went there to argue, they said. They argued about, boxer Jackson way back when.
Oh, Jack Johnson.
Jack Johnson, yeah. Anyway, they argued about that fight because he lost. They argued about World War I at the time. And then they argued about George Enoch because he was propositioning all these black women. And going rate was 50 cents. So he was arguing about that. Apparently George Enoch pulled a gun, and when he did that, he kind of pointed it towards Roy, and Dinky White shot him in the hand. And then George Enoch runs off. He's okay, basically. He dies a couple years later of tuberculosis, though. But anyway, he runs off, and Roy and Dinky decide they're going to rob the store now. Well, they got $1.30 and some tobacco products, and then they took off. And he ended up getting arrested by George Stiegel, who was the constable, and Philip Hobbs, who was the assistant. Got arrested several months later, and the main thing he was worried about was getting mobbed. So they took care of that. And you're talking about the Jesse Washington thing. Well, he was a trustee in the jail when Jesse Washington was
Stegall
attacked.
was?
No, Roy was.
Roy was a trustee.
Roy was a trustee. He'd been to trial in October, and but they held him till October. I mean, and he was when it happened in May or whatever.
Yeah,
he was there.
Oh my goodness!
So he ended up. Dinky White got 15 years, died in prison, tuberculosis, and then and Roy supposedly got a month on the chain gang, but instead they turned around and said that he had. I guess they got him for the breaking into the store, and he got a year for that. And they said that they were thinking that there was a charge against him in Marlin, which I haven't been able to find on if there was or not. But his draft card in World War I says that he was working on the county farm in Marlin.
Okay.
So, or not Marlin, actually a little town south of Marlin by Rosebud.
Yeah.
It's not there no more.
Okay.
So then he comes back to Waco and don't really hear anything of him. He got in trouble for stealing 3 tires one time, inner tubes, $9 worth of stuff. And he was in a fight once, cost him $5. His brother-in-law was in the fight, and they cost him $25. So you don't hear much about him here and there, but he worked at a whole bunch of car places. And handyman jobs like anybody else back then. Then you got the first killings. Well, first off, there was 3 unsolved murders that nobody really knows if he did it or not. They suspected him. It could fit him, but then again, there wasn't any evidence, and a defense attorney could get knocked down real quick.
Yeah.
He goes and the triple murders out of Concord happened. Mr. Barker and his son Mr. Barker and his wife. Mr. Barker's in his 70s. His wife is in her 30s, and they got a 4-year-old daughter. The 13-year-old boy from across the street, Homer Turk, comes over, and they're playing dominoes. He goes outside to put the horse up, and somebody shoots him in the face. And then the wife and the neighbor boy go outside. There's 2 black people, and the 4-year-old girl survives everything. She's hiding in the bedroom. She says they look like Mexicans, but they sounded like black people. And that was the description. One was bigger than the other, and that was her description. The little boy started to run. They killed him with an axe. The woman was in the house, or they took her in the house to get some money. She gave him $3, and they killed her with an axe. And then, out of remorse or whatever, they put $1 back in her hand. Somebody did. Then they left. And the next morning, the father across the street comes looking for his son. He finds him still alive, but he's got terrible head injuries, in a coma. And he's only able to speak 1 or 2 words and never does say who did it or not. And the little girl tells all her stories. Then a week or so later, a couple black guys are walking down the road, and a gin operator sees him, and he has a hunch that they had something to do with it. So he goes and contacts Constable Stegall at the time. They go and they do the they catch the people on the square there, and then they take them. And one was Benny Young, and not even a functional idiot, right? Basically. He supposedly had spells, and he was illiterate, didn't know much of anything. Good for toting. That's about it. Then the other one was Cooper Johnson, and somehow they confessed. They took him to Waxahachie. They had a trial. They separated them, separate trials, and both were found guilty. But Benny Young got 99 years, and Cooper Johnson got a death penalty. Of course, now he never did get hung, but he died a week before Roy did of tuberculosis and syphilis.
Okay.
He was in the poor farm for a while, and also he was in jail with Roy. He was leading a sing-along one time while Roy was in the jail, so they knew each other. The question was, later on, Roy said that he was the one that did it.
I see.
He also said that he went to the trial of both people, and he went to the scene of the crime the day after the murder with a whole bunch of other onlookers. And he had nothing to lose. He'd already had 5 death penalties against him.
Yeah.
So that one I'm not sure about.
Yeah.
It could go either way.
Yeah.
But he had a lot better confession than the other two did. His was more detailed. Of course, now he could have talked to him at any time and found things out. But John Sheehy, who was well known here, was their defense attorney, and a man named Garrett was his helper. Interesting thing about the Barker family, she died over giving them $3. They called the brother up, the son, and he came down from Fort Worth. He said that he'd gotten a letter saying that it's possible they were going to have some trouble there real soon. Well, about 8 years before, Barker had testified against a guy on manslaughter charge, and the guy had gotten out, and his wife wrote a letter to the Barkers up in Fort Worth, told them there could be problems. And so that made everybody, that's a red herring there.
Yeah.
No longer is it 2 black guys with that look like Mexicans. It's now, well, they arrested 9 black guys, 9 Mexicans that worked in a wood camp nearby, 2 white men and 1 white woman.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah,
Why?
Yeah.
Don't they believe little 4-year-old? She knows the difference. They go ahead and while they started searching the house before the Barker sons got there, found $300 or $400 hidden everywhere in the house.
Okay.
All over the place, behind curtains, behind windows, you name it. There was money there. Then by the time they were done, they had $1,300 they'd found.
Oh, wow.
And he also had a habit of, he had $160 or $70 in gold in the smokehouse that he'd polished up. They say he loved to polish gold coins.
Well, so this was when, John?
This was in 1922, February.
Okay.
This is really before Roy admitted to doing it, but later on when he killed William Driscoll, which was in the 1700 block of Barnard Street, right there behind L&M Electronics. That used to be L&M Electronics. Yeah. But anyway, he killed him there, and he said that Driscoll was the first one he ever killed. Well, then at the end of the things, then he comes up and says, "Oh, I did do the Barkers too.
Yeah.
So who you
Yeah,
believe?
you don't know. Yeah.
He had a habit of. I've got one of his confessions here, and he makes some lies in there. The things, he said like a watch he claimed he threw in the Brazos off the Washington Street Bridge. Well, just before he died, he said, "Oh, by the way, it's in Detroit with that other watch that I gave you for that other guy." He turned in another watch before that, and then the gun that was missing, he did the same thing. A day or two before he died, he told them that it was up there in Elm Mott, and he sold it to this black friend of his, Mr. Wesley Erath. So.
Yeah, so there's some mistruths in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Things that he held back. He knew how to work the system.
Well, I know it was really in spring 1922, spring 1922, where hysteria from murders started kind of setting in Waco. And if you could kind of take us through those cases.
Well, you had Driscoll.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Driscoll killing, I have a magazine here. It was done by Ella Marie Farmer. And Ella Marie Farmer was the sister-in-law of C.S. Farmer, who was a district attorney at the time. And you think, well, boy, they're going to have some really good information. Well, I think they kind of whitewashed things because Mr. Driscoll was a 60-something-year-old man, and she says how his image was, squeaky clean and everything. It turned out, if you look at the divorce decree just a year before that, the wife, not only was she mad that he divorced her, but was mad because he didn't ask her permission first.
So do we know, does Mitchell later give a motive for that killing?
No.
Okay.
See, that's the thing, because when he goes to do the confession, Sheriff Stegall jumps in and says, "Wait a second, Roy, let me tell you how I think you did it." Which it was obvious how he did it. He was standing behind the door in the garage. Driscoll drove in. He gets out of the car. He's got his pistol in his hand because it's dark and he might have money on him, whatever. But anyway, he walks towards the door. Roy clocks him with an axe, the back of an axe, and then maybe the front. One time they say he got hit 6 times. Other times maybe once or twice. But anyway, throughout this thing, you always get 2 different paper stories, and then you might even get another eyewitness account from somebody else. And they vary just a little bit. So I give all 3. Well, anyway, he goes and then he wraps him up in a quilt and drags his body into this other shed and covers him with cotton seeds, stuff like that. Steals a real nice shotgun, double barrel hammerless shotgun. Let's see, got a real nice scabbard that was custom made for him, razor, and I forget how much, $10. There was talk of a diamond ring, a pinky ring too, but I don't know if they claimed he had it, but I don't know if Roy got it or not.
Okay.
But anyway, because that's never mentioned again after that. He might have had it on his dresser or something like that, and they found it later. Well, anyway, he had a brand new cook there who'd been working there about a month. Now, Ella Farmer, in her story, says that Driscoll and Roy had a fight, and that Driscoll had taken a chair and hit Roy with a chair to run him away from the house. And the reason he was running him away from the house was because Roy was showing attention for the maid, and the maid was separated from her husband, and she had all of her kids I don't know where she was living, but anyway, she had left her farmer husband, farmer with an A,
Yeah.
and had left him and had gone to work for Mr. Driscoll. Well, Roy was going there. Roy had worked at Driscoll's house. He had visited with Hattie Wilson was her name. But Mr. Driscoll said that he was concerned that the husband would come around and cause trouble.
I see.
Well, Mr. Driscoll is a 60-year-old white man with a badge and a gun in his own home. Do you think if a black guy shows up and says, hey, I want to talk to my wife, he'd just say, hit the road. And if you don't hit the road, here's something for you. So
Is there suspicion on Roy in this initial death?
in the Ella Farmer story,
Yeah.
there is.
Okay.
But he's got an alibi, supposedly. There was
Okay.
Albert Brown Cowan was about a 60-year-old man, a real estate man, lived at Katie Place's rooming house, which was a real nice place at 12th and Franklin. And he had, one person, Ella Farmer tried to say that they heard his car go by the Concord, the Barker's house the night of the murder. Said it had a distinctive sound. Well, that was kind of it wasn't, and she changed names for a lot of people. She left the real name in for some, but then others she changed the names. One reason she changed the names is that around that time they got sued. True Detective got sued by two criminals in town here, Frank Hardy and Will Turner. They said they did something that they claimed they didn't, and one was able to. He got about $2,500. They sued him for $25,000. He got about $2,500, and then they got overturned, and he didn't get the money. But
Oh, wow.
it's a shame. It couldn't happen to better people than True Detective. But anyway, she throws out the name Roy Mitchell in that as being the driver for Mr. Cowan, which he was, but then she gets this elaborate alibi saying that what happened was Roy drives the car into Mr. Cowan's garage, takes the lock and hooks it on there but doesn't lock it. And then he takes the key upstairs and gives it to Mr. Cowan, and Mr. Cowan goes, oh, well, I got the key, so he couldn't have done it last night.
Yeah,
I got the key.
Yeah.
In the meantime, he undoes it, pushes the car out, drives it away. Well, if this car's got such a distinctive sound, and it happened around 9 o'clock at night, got a distinctive sound supposedly. Supposedly there's two people involved, two black people. Here's two black people pushing a car out of a garage on 12th and Franklin. And the garage, there were several apartments above the garage too as well. So here you are, two black guys pushing a car out, and then they don't tell how far you got to go because of this distinctive sound that she's talking about. And then they drive off, and now they got to turn around and come back and push the car back in. How far back do you stop with that distinctive sound and then start pushing the car in late at night? So it's a little,
Was there an arrest made in the Driscoll case?
No.
Never. Okay.
There was, and for a long time they didn't suspect any black people either, because they said that they didn't think a black person would treat a dead body like he did, touch it as much and everything. They thought they were too superstitious. Well, that's good for him.
Yeah.
And they say whoever did it apparently was smart and was able to hide the evidence and all that. So they figured it had to be a white guy.
They underestimated. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And Roy writes a note and leaves in his pocket, in Driscoll's pocket. Says, this will teach him to mess with my wife.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
Driscoll's family, people, had to be a white woman.
Yeah.
There's no way. Well, it wouldn't be the first time that
Yeah.
somebody taken. And why was she a new person working there?
Yeah.
I mean, they talked to the farmer maid, but they didn't really farmer cook. But nothing came out in the paper about that. So there was, I forget how many. There was 7 or 8. There was tons and tons of people that were associated with law enforcement that went at his funeral.
Mm-hmm.
There was like 20 honorary pallbearers and then 7 regular pallbearers. Stiegel was one of the pallbearers. So like I said, when the time came, he comes up and goes, hey, let the county attorney, and they said, no, there's no way we ever get a conviction. Why even try him? Nobody's going to, he was acting like with the knowledge he had at the time.
Well, it's also the climate, the racial climate
Right.
of the period. Yeah. No
Right.
one was going to convict a white man for, yeah.
For thinking that his wife, because, as far as he knew, his girl said he did it.
Yeah.
But now I think it was the observation with where Foster from the Citizen newspaper, I think or it could have been Bill Kerrigan that had the story about saying why she said what she did. His side of the story, I think, was that she was surprised to see Jesse Thomas there. She supposedly knew him or something like that and saw him.
I think Bill Kerrigan makes that argument in his book. Yeah. Yeah. That's what that meant. Yeah.
Bill Kerrigan's dad was my school teacher at TSTI, and Bill was a summer helper at H&B Construction for a while with me one time.
Yeah, so
and then he went on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, so Bill Kerrigan's book, Making of Lynching Culture, is really an important book to document a lot of lynchings in Central Texas. Well, John, I may break for part 1. That's a good point to break for part 1. Can we do that?
That's fine. I've got.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll pick up part 2 next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. This has been a Rogue Media Network production.
Frozen, heroes. Gonna tell you about frozen heroes. Gonna tell you about.
Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Mike.
And we have a fantastic new podcast to tell you about. Bros, Foes, and Heroes. It's the two of us looking into the world of comics, breaking down some characters that you may have never heard of, and some that are just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so Zach comes up with a character each time, and I go into it just completely blind. I don't know who this person is or what their abilities are or anything, and basically I guess we kind of go over their origin story and just some of the ridiculous stuff that maybe, especially Golden Age stuff.
Oh, Golden Age stuff is always the best, and we will make sure to highlight all of the shenanigans and just absolute weirdness of everything.
Yeah, that's right. So subscribe today and follow us on Instagram at Bros Foes Heroes.
And if you don't, I know where you live. Not really, but please subscribe.
Bros and foes and heroes. Gonna tell you about bros and foes and heroes. Gonna tell you about.
Hi, I'm Hank. You might remember me from a show called King of the Hill. Check out a King of the Hill rewatch podcast. These boys ain't right, but they are funny. Find the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts or at roguemedianetwork.com. I tell you what.